My name is Eliza Moreau, and I am 52 years old. For nearly 2 decades, I devoted myself to Novatech Solutions, a technology powerhouse in Frankfurt. As a senior software engineer, I poured 18 years of my life into the company, weaving lines of code into the foundation of its most celebrated product, DataSync. That platform, a marvel of distributed data processing, had become the quiet engine behind more than half of Europe's largest corporations. Every refinement, every breakthrough in its algorithm carried a piece of my mind and my discipline. But on a gray October morning, that loyalty was met with silence and coldness. In the sterile light of a boardroom, they cut me off as if I were a disposable variable in their equations. I was fired. They expected me to walk away with bowed shoulders, carrying only the bitterness of betrayal. They thought I would fade into obscurity, another casualty of corporate politics. What they didn't know was that I had anticipated this move. Behind the stillness of my expression lay a plan, one precise, calculated, and inevitable. What awaited them was not resignation, but a tremor powerful enough to shake the entire tech industry. If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories. They're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. The room was small, almost claustrophobic, though the glass walls gave the illusion of transparency. I had sat in that same meeting space countless times, often discussing breakthroughs, timelines, or budgets. But that morning, the air was different, sterile, rehearsed, heavy with something that had nothing to do with innovation. Across the table sat Claudia Schmidt, Novatech's chief executive officer, her posture immaculate, her tailored navy suit impeccable. Her blue eyes were cold, calculated, and laced with just enough satisfaction to betray the mask of regret she tried to wear. Beside her was Hans Weber from Human Resources, a man whose entire career seemed built on finding ways to package cruelty in polite envelopes. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his face arranged into a mask of stern professionalism, though I caught the flicker of irritation at having to be here at all. I had worked with Hans for years. His politeness was always rehearsed, his apologies mechanical. "Eliza," Claudia began, her voice smooth, almost velvet, but each syllable cut with precision, sharp as the edge of a scalpel. "As you know, Novatech is entering a new phase. We are restructuring. Your position will be consolidated into the product development division. This was not an easy decision, but the company must look toward the future." I said nothing. Hans leaned forward, sliding a beige folder across the polished table toward me. His tone was flat, as though he were reading lines from a script he had performed a dozen times. "This outlines your severance package. 3 weeks' pay for each year of service, continued health coverage for 6 months, and assistance with outplacement. We truly are sorry." Sorry. The word hung in the air like smoke from a cheap candle, pungent and unconvincing. I looked from Hans to Claudia, searching for even a flicker of sincerity, but found nothing. Their eyes were not regretful. They were calculating, relieved even, as though discarding me was an obstacle removed from their path. The beige folder sat untouched before me. I knew its contents without opening it. Neat bullet points, carefully crafted clauses designed to dull the sharp edge of betrayal. But I did not need consolation. I had already mourned this outcome weeks ago when I accidentally received an email not meant for me, Claudia's email to the General Counsel. In it, she wrote with brutal efficiency about the need to refresh leadership by replacing legacy staff with younger, cost-effective talent. Legacy staff. That was me. 18 years of dedication reduced to a liability to be excised. I folded my hands on the table, my voice calm, even. "I understand." Claudia blinked, surprised. Her lips curved in the faintest of smiles, though her raised eyebrow betrayed her disappointment. She had expected drama, perhaps tears or a protest, maybe even a desperate attempt to negotiate. She wanted me to cling to my career, to expose some shred of fear that a 52-year-old woman, cast aside by the relentless machinery of the tech world, might not find her footing again. But I gave her nothing. Instead, I leaned back slightly, my tone light, almost indifferent. "I'll clear my desk by Friday, as requested." I rose, picking up the untouched folder as though it weighed nothing. "Is there anything else?" For a brief moment, silence settled over the room. Claudia and Hans exchanged a quick glance, as though my composure unnerved them. Finally, Claudia cleared her throat, reclaiming her mask of authority. "No, that will be all. Thank you for your professionalism, Eliza." I gave her the faintest of smiles, a pale, brittle thing that never touched my eyes. Then I turned and walked to the door. Corridor outside hummed with the usual corporate rhythm, heels clicking on tile, the low murmur of meetings in progress, the distant hiss of the espresso machine in the break lounge. But behind those glass walls, life was not ordinary. I slowed for just a second as I passed the larger executive conference room. Through the transparent barrier, I saw Lucas Braun, Novatech's CEO, commanding the room with his usual exuberance. He stood at the head of the table, gesturing animatedly at a slide filled with colorful charts, Q4 growth projections. His voice, though muffled by glass, carried the cadence of rehearsed optimism. The board members leaned in, nodding, jotting notes, feeding off his enthusiasm. "Lucas." I remembered standing in the wings at the Berlin Tech Conference the previous year, my name buried in the program notes as research contributor. He had taken the stage, basking in the spotlight, and presented the crown jewel of my work, the distributed processing algorithm that became the beating heart of DataSync, as his own visionary leadership. The applause had thundered, the cameras had flashed, and I had remained invisible, a shadow in the background. He had reduced me to a footnote in my own creation. Now, as I watched him from the hallway, his hands slicing the air, his smile dazzling, my calm exterior held firm. But inside me, something shifted. A quiet ember that had smoldered for weeks suddenly flared, hot and bright. I was not humiliated. I was not defeated. What I felt was focus, sharper than any humiliation they had intended to inflict. They thought they had written my ending. They imagined I would vanish into obscurity, carrying their neatly packaged compensation and a bitter sense of powerlessness. But what Claudia, Hans, and Lucas did not understand was that I had seen their playbook before they ever performed it. I had prepared. As I stepped into the elevator, the beige folder still unopened in my hand, I caught my own reflection in the mirrored walls. My face was composed, my eyes steady. But behind them, a storm brewed, disciplined, deliberate, unstoppable. By the time the elevator doors closed, I knew this was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of their reckoning. Back in my office, I closed the door quietly behind me. The hallway outside buzzed with its usual rhythm, but in here, silence wrapped around me like armor. My office had always been a sanctuary, neat rows of books on algorithms and system design, a potted plant that had somehow survived years of neglect, and the familiar hum of my computer monitors. Today, though, it felt like the last page of a chapter one hadn't chosen to end. I pulled out my personal phone, unlocked it with a steady hand, and typed a single message. They did it. Friday is the last day. Ready? The reply came within seconds. Stefan Keller, perfect. Contract is ready. Dinner tonight, 8 p.m. to finalize everything. My lips curved into a slow, deliberate smile. I glanced at the desk calendar, the neat squares of the week staring back at me. Friday, the day Novatech thought they had silenced me. But Monday, oh Monday, would be carved into memory not as my defeat, but as the day the industry shifted. That evening, I drove to the outskirts of Frankfurt, where the city lights softened into the glow of quiet suburbs. The restaurant Stefan had chosen was discreet, elegant, and old-world in its charm. Golden light spilled from chandeliers, softened by the lacquered wooden screens that divided the space into intimate alcoves. It was the kind of place where whispered conversations vanished into the air, never to be repeated. Stefan was already there when I arrived, a glass of red wine in his hand. His salt and pepper hair caught the amber light, and his confidence filled the room as naturally as breathing. He rose when he saw me, extending a hand with genuine warmth. "Eliza," he said, voice low, respectful. "You look calm." I gave a quiet laugh as I slid into the seat opposite him. "Would you prefer tears? Desperation? That's what they were hoping for." He raised his glass, swirling the liquid with a thoughtful motion. "They actually did it. Fired the woman who built the very foundation of their empire. Lucas Braun is even more foolish than I thought." I took a sip of water before answering. Lucas never understood the algorithm. To him, DataSync was nothing but a shiny product to parade on stage, a story for investors. The deeper structure? He dismissed it as technical details. Stefan leaned forward, curiosity alive in his eyes. "Tell me again the part about the patent. It still astounds me." And so I told him, as I had rehearsed it in my mind countless times. 3 months earlier, I had made a discovery. Novatech, despite boasting about innovation, had neglected to file a patent for my distributed processing algorithm. When I asked about it, they brushed it off, calling it an oversight. They promised it would be handled promptly. But I knew better. I dug deeper into the internal archives and unearthed a confidential strategy memo. In black and white, they laid out their intentions: to declare the algorithm company property, erasing me as its inventor. Their plan was meticulous: force me out before the filing, then rely on the standard contract clause that claimed all intellectual property developed during employment belonged to Novatech. They would lock me out of my own creation. What they didn't know was that I had already moved ahead of them. Night after night, I sat at my kitchen table, my personal laptop open, the glow of the screen the only witness. I refined the algorithm, pushed its boundaries, and achieved what I had once thought impossible: a 48% increase in processing efficiency. It was no longer the same system, it was a leap forward, a rebirth. And every line of code was time-stamped, logged, and stored in private repositories far beyond Novatech's reach. With Stefan's introduction to one of Europe's leading intellectual property attorneys, the process moved swiftly. The evidence was irrefutable. My development was independent, outside of company hours, on personal equipment. Patent was granted with my name alone on the inventor line. By the time Novatech realized what they had overlooked, it was already mine. Stefan's expression was one of admiration mixed with awe. He slid a folder across the table, its leather cover cool beneath my fingertips. "Here it is. The agreement. Sign it, and DataCore will have exclusive rights to your patent. And on Monday morning, we announce you as our new Chief Technology Officer." I opened the folder, though I already knew the contents by heart. Contract had been reviewed, negotiated, and refined over weeks. It was generous to a degree that almost startled me: an 8-figure signing bonus, a substantial equity stake in DataCore, and ongoing royalties from every product that incorporated my breakthrough. Till one concern lingered. What about my team? My team. 6 brilliant engineers I had handpicked, mentored, and watched grow. Each one had potential that went beyond Novatech's narrow vision, and I could not bear to abandon them. Stefan's smile was reassuring. "Already arranged. We have positions ready for all 6, each with a 30% salary increase plus leadership opportunities. They only need to say yes." For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than controlled anger. Relief. Gratitude. Even a flicker of excitement. I picked up the pen and signed my name in deliberate strokes. With each curve of ink, I felt as though I were declaring independence, reclaiming ownership not just of my invention but of my identity. Stefan lifted his glass again, eyes gleaming. To new beginnings. I raised my own. And to owning what is rightfully ours. Clink of crystal against crystal sealed the moment. Later, as I drove home through the quiet streets, the contract resting securely in my bag, my thoughts returned to Novatech. I pictured Claudia's cold gaze, Hans's mechanical sympathy, Lucas's self-satisfied smile. By Friday, I would vanish from their offices like a shadow. But on Monday, when DataCore announced me and my patent to the world, the earthquake would hit. They believed they had ended my career. Instead, they had sharpened my resolve and handed me the leverage I needed to dismantle the very foundation of their empire. The night air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves. For the first time in months, I rolled down the window and breathed deeply, the city lights flickering in the distance. I felt alive again, no longer chained by their dismissal or diminished by their arrogance. Monday was coming, and with it, a reckoning. Thursday bled into Friday in a blur of exit interviews, knowledge transfers, and forced politeness. I moved through the routines with mechanical precision, a performer in a play whose ending had already been written. Every hour brought a new round of hushed voices, awkward glances, and whispered sympathy that only deepened my resolve. The younger engineers, bright, ambitious, and still naive, came to me hesitantly, clutching notepads or hovering awkwardly by my desk. They asked for letters of recommendation on LinkedIn, their voices almost apologetic, as though acknowledging my departure might make it more real. I offered them professional assurances, not kindness. They would learn soon enough how little loyalty counted in this industry. Administrative assistants lingered near the break room, lowering their voices when they spoke about me. "She doesn't deserve this," I overheard one murmur, thinking I was too far away to notice. Their pity pricked at me more than Claudia's disdain ever had. I didn't want pity. I wanted justice. So I documented everything. Every handoff, every password, every workflow. I didn't do it for Novatech's benefit. I did it for mine, for the record that when they tried to spin this narrative, the facts would show I had done everything properly. My professionalism would stand as evidence, while theirs would unravel. By Friday afternoon, only one formality remained. The final exit interview. Hans sat across from me once more, his tie slightly askew, his voice devoid of inflection. He read questions from a printed list, his pen poised over a checklist like a bureaucrat stamping passports. "Do you confirm that all intellectual property developed during your employment belongs to Novatech?" Corners of my mouth curved upward, though my eyes stayed sharp. "Of course," I replied smoothly. "Anything developed in the scope of my duties, using company resources during company hours." I placed deliberate emphasis on each qualifier, enunciating as though I were reading legal text aloud. Hans didn't look up. He was too preoccupied with ticking boxes to notice the precision of my wording. His head bobbed in automatic acknowledgement. Good. That's all. When I returned to my office to clear the last of my belongings, the atmosphere felt strangely hollow. The walls, once covered with whiteboard sketches and diagrams of systems in progress, now stood bare. My shelves, emptied of books and files, seemed almost to mock me with their blankness. I packed the final box: family photos, a worn coffee mug, the small cactus that had outlived countless product cycles. It was then that Claudia appeared. She leaned casually against the doorframe, arms folded, her smile just a shade too polished. "Eliza," she began, her voice dipped in artificial warmth. "Just wanted to make sure everything is clear before you leave. You know, these decisions are never personal." I met her gaze evenly, letting silence stretch between us until she shifted slightly, the tiniest crack in her composure. "I understand, Claudia," I said at last, my tone even, deliberate. "Business is business." There was something in my voice that gave her pause. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her features before she forced it away with a dismissive smile. "Will you take some time off?" she asked, her tone feigning concern. "Rest, recharge a little?" I slid the last drawer shut and turned to face her fully. "No," I said, with a calm finality that felt almost like a blade slipping between armor plates. "I already have new plans. I start Monday. A leadership role. Quite exciting." Claudia's eyebrows lifted, but only for a second. She nodded quickly, her eyes darting away as if the matter were already beneath her. "Well, good for you," she murmured, her attention clearly elsewhere. I picked up the box, its weight balanced easily in my hands. Claudia lingered a moment longer, then gave a tight smile before disappearing down the corridor. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Monday would not just mark a new chapter for me. It would mark the collapse of Novatech's illusion of invulnerability. Their empire had been built on my foundation, and by Monday morning the ground beneath them would begin to crack. As I walked out for the last time, my ID card dangling uselessly from its lanyard, I felt no sorrow, no nostalgia. Only anticipation. Monday morning, I stepped into Datacorp's Munich headquarters wearing a brand new charcoal suit, the fabric still crisp from the tailor's fold. It didn't feel like a first day at work. It felt like entering a battlefield I had been preparing for all along. The glass tower gleamed against a clear autumn sky, reflecting light with the kind of sharp brilliance I wished Novatech had once recognized in me. The revolving doors parted, and the receptionist greeted me with a polite, almost reverent smile, so different from the dismissive nods I had grown used to. On the 27th floor, my office awaited. A corner suite lined with floor-to-ceiling glass gave me a panoramic view of Munich, red-tiled rooftops blending into steel and glass towers. I stood silently for a moment, taking it in. This wasn't just a new role, it was vindication carved into skyline and steel. At precisely 7 a.m., Datacorp's press release went live. On the monitors mounted in the boardroom, bold letters announced, "Datacorp Innovation secures exclusive rights to revolutionary distributed processing algorithm, welcomes inventor Eliza Moreau as Chief Technology Officer." My name. My invention. For the first time in years, the world saw me as the originator, not a faceless cog hidden behind Lucas Braun's spotlight. The release made one detail painfully clear. I was the sole inventor, and from that moment forward, any company hoping to leverage the technology would need to negotiate licensing terms with Datacorp. The message was both a warning shot and a declaration of power. 9:15, my phone lit up. A message from Lena, my lead engineer back at Novatech. "Total chaos here. What did you do?" I smiled as I typed back. "Check your personal email. All 6 of you have job offers waiting." I could almost picture her face, shock, excitement, and maybe a flicker of relief. For too long, Lena and the others had labored under dismissive managers who stole credit as easily as they stole ours. Now they had a chance to build, to be valued, to thrive. Meanwhile, just 10 miles away, Novatech's Monday meeting was collapsing into a full-scale crisis. Lena's messages came rapid-fire, Lucas storming into headquarters, only to find the CFO and chief legal officer already waiting in the boardroom, faces pale, voices sharp. The stock market opened like a judge pronouncing sentence. Novatech plummeted 8% within minutes. Datacorp surged 15%. Investors were reacting faster than Novatech's executives could comprehend what had happened. By mid-morning, the calls started flooding in. Journalists from Europe, the US, and Asia wanted my statement. "Can you confirm the exclusivity? How did Novatech lose such a critical asset? What does this mean for the industry?" Their headlines were already brutal. Novatech loses core algorithm to rival, and strategic misstep could destroy tech giant. At 11 a.m., an email arrived in my inbox from none other than Lucas Braun himself. "Eliza, it seems there's been a misunderstanding. Please call me directly so we can discuss." I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded it to Datacorp's legal team, adding no commentary. Silence can be sharper than any argument, and Lucas would soon realize how little leverage he had left. By noon, 3 major tech outlets had published in-depth pieces dissecting Novatek's blunder. Analysts speculated about mass layoffs, regulatory scrutiny, and an exodus of talent. In contrast, Datacorp's image soared. Investors hailed the company as visionary, courageous enough to back an inventor who had been underestimated elsewhere. I spent the early afternoon in my first strategy session with Datacorp's development team. The room hummed with energy, engineers eager to learn, managers eager to support, eyes filled with respect rather than skepticism. It was a respect I had never tasted at Novatek, and it fueled me like oxygen. As the day unfolded, I realized this was more than a professional victory. It was justice. And justice, I thought, was only just beginning. By Tuesday, Novatek's situation had gone from bad to worse. Lena's messages painted the scene vividly. Lucas had called for an all-hands meeting, his voice echoing through the auditorium as he tried to project confidence. He promised the company would defend its intellectual property and assured employees that the situation was under control. But the faces staring back at him were skeptical, tired, and unconvinced. People weren't buying it anymore. By the time the meeting ended, LinkedIn was alive with updates. Engineers quietly changed their status to open to work. Project managers hinted at new opportunities. Even those who had once sworn loyalty to Novatek were preparing for the inevitable collapse. Claudia, Lena said, looked as if she might faint. The moment that undid her came when a young engineer, no older than 27, stood up and asked bluntly, "Why didn't we secure a patent if this algorithm was truly ours?" Questions sliced through the room like a blade. Claudia stammered, her usually polished composure crumbling in real time. She tried to deflect, to shift blame towards strategic oversight, but everyone in the room knew the truth. The oversight had been hers and Lucas's and the board's. By late afternoon, Hans called me. His voice trembled, a mixture of desperation and denial. "Eliza," he began, clearing his throat nervously, "we think there might have been a misunderstanding about the ownership of the algorithm." I let the silence stretch for a beat before answering, my tone flat, precise. "There is no misunderstanding, Hans. Patent is mine. It was developed on my time, on my equipment, with my resources. Any further discussion should go through Datacorp's legal team." There was no reply, just a long, heavy pause, and then the line went dead. That silence felt like the first real admission of defeat. By the weekend, Novatek officially tipped into crisis. Their stock had fallen another 25%. Major investors began pulling out, cutting losses before the company sank further. The board of directors, cornered and humiliated, acted swiftly. Lucas was dismissed as CEO. Claudia, once the cold architect of my removal, was forced to resign. Their names vanished from the company website overnight, as if erasing them could erase the mistakes that had brought Novatek to its knees. A temporary CEO was installed. Carl Fisher, a steady, silver-haired executive known more for cleaning up disasters than for innovation. On Sunday evening, I received an email from him. "Ms. Moreau, congratulations on your new position. Novatek would like to discuss licensing your technology. We are prepared to formally recognize your contributions." His tone was cautious, deferential, respectful, the exact opposite of the arrogance I had faced in that cold, glass-walled room weeks earlier. I forwarded the email to Stefan, Datacorp's CEO, adding only a short note, "Phase 1 complete." 3 months later, I stood on stage at the European Technology Conference in Paris. The auditorium was filled with industry leaders, journalists, investors, and rows of young engineers eager to glimpse the future. My name was displayed on the massive screen behind me, not buried in the fine print of someone else's credits, but front and center. Eliza Moreau, Chief Technology Officer, Datacorp Innovations. The spotlight was warm against my face as I began. Today, I want to talk about intellectual property and the value of recognition, I said, letting my voice carry through the hall. Technology advances because individuals take risks, invest their time, their creativity, and often their very identity into the work. Protecting that work is not just about patents or contracts, it's about respect. It's about justice. I spoke not only of algorithms and systems but of dignity, of how innovation flourishes when creators are acknowledged, not exploited. The audience listened intently, some nodding, some scribbling notes. After the talk, as the crowd thinned, a young engineer approached me. She had auburn hair tucked into a messy bun, a badge identifying her as Anna, junior developer. Her eyes glowed with nervous determination. "Your story changed the way I work," she said softly. "I've started documenting everything on my personal devices. Every idea, every draft. I won't let anyone take credit for what I create." I smiled at her, recognizing the same spark I had once carried in my 20s. "Smart move," I told her. "Protect your value. No one else will do it for you." Anna nodded, visibly relieved, as if she had needed permission to claim ownership of her own brilliance. Watching her walk away, I realized my story was no longer just mine. It had become a warning, a lesson, and maybe even a beacon. Justice had begun with me, but its ripples were already moving outward. 1 year after my dismissal, I sat in my spacious office at DataCore, reviewing the quarterly innovation report. The numbers spoke louder than any headline. For new product launches, a steady rise in adoption and market share carved directly out of Novatech's domain. Stefan walked in carrying a chilled bottle of champagne, his grin uncontainable. "Congratulations, Elisa. DataCore has just surpassed Novatech in market value." I raised my glass, not in triumph over their downfall, but in quiet celebration of recognition. For the first time in my career, my name stood beside the algorithm that had changed the face of data management. Recognition, not erasure. Respect, not exploitation. Novatech, now under Carl's leadership, had signed a licensing agreement with DataCore. Publicly and unambiguously, they acknowledged me as the rightful inventor. They had even restructured their internal policies, inspired by the intellectual property protection program I had built here. It was ironic but fitting. My legacy had shaped both competitors. Yet what mattered most was not their collapse, nor even DataCore's ascent. What mattered was the proof. Innovation is never anonymous. It is born from real people, and those people deserve their place in history. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.